Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, Preserving Your Child's Craft in Resin, Take 2. Well, last week on the show, I showed you how I took my granddaughter's salt dough project and made a heart-shaped mold, poured it in clear resin, and made a little oak stand for it. And that project was a load of fun. And while my wife loved it, she got one as well, but she has a different idea in mind for what she wants hers to be. So she asked me, was it possible? Could I do it? And I thought, sure. And then I thought, maybe you guys would like to see an alternative to the way that I did mine, and maybe you'd like to see how she would like hers. And that's what we're going to do today. And once again, it starts by making a mold. Well, the first thing that we need to do is get some scrap plexi, and I'm going to cut some strips that are 1.25 inches wide. Using some more scrap plexi, we're going to cut a piece that is 4 inches by 6 inches. Well, I've cut 2 strips at 4 inches wide so that they will fit on both ends of our scrap piece of plexi. And I have cut these pieces so that they are the same length as the whole assembly. So that would be 6 inches plus the thickness of this piece of plexi and this piece of plexi. Depending on what plexi you use, you'll have to come up with those measurements on your own because I don't know the thickness you're using. So now all I'm going to do is use a little bit of CA glue to help me hold this together. I'm going to peel off the inside backing here of this piece of plexi, and we're going to basically assemble our mold. Okay, well, truth be told, the CA glue was giving me one heck of a hard time, so I decided I'm just going to hold it together using packing tape. There's not a lot of pressure on these molds, so it doesn't have to be super adhered. But we will join the whole thing together using packing tape and then seal up our corners with packing tape as well. Now just go around all the corners of your mold and make sure that you've got it sealed all the way around with your tape. That way our resin isn't going to leak out of this once we pour it. And there, my friends, is our 4-inch by 6-inch mold for our resin. So the next thing we need to do is prepare our child's craft. And if you remember from last week's show, it was a salt dough project. Last week we made it on pedestals and we supported our piece, sort of raised it up in our mold so that it wasn't sitting on the bottom, and we did that with the use of clear resin rods that we made by injecting plastic straws. I don't think we need to see that process again. You can see it here. It's a little messy, but it did a great job. So we're going to use some of those rods now to prepare our project in this mold. So just as we did with our other project, we're going to use a razor saw and a stop block, and we're going to cut some 1/4 inch lengths out of our clear resin rod. You'll need 4 of them in total. And now, just like we did with our other project, we're going to use a little bit of CA glue and glue these resin rods in place on the back of our project. This will allow it to be suspended in our mold and will prevent it from sitting on the bottom, giving it that floating illusion. So glue all 4 of your resin rods in place, and then we can move on. Well, at this point, we'll just mix up a batch of resin. Hopefully I've mixed enough. It's hard for me to gauge sometimes how much I need. So if I did not mix enough, it's no big deal. I'll just make a small batch and pour it into the mold before it has a chance to cure. And once you have it mixed up, we'll just carefully pour it into our mold, being sure to give it time to seep underneath our project. And I did not mix enough resin, so I'm gonna mix another little small batch off camera, and then I will get this into the pressure pot to let it cure. Well, now one little caution about pouring in this mold. You want to make sure that your mold is level inside that pressure pot. If it's not level, you will not get uniform thickness all the way around, and it will interfere with the next step of the build. So make sure it's level so that you get a uniform thickness, and I'll see you when it cures. With the resin dry, we'll just crack it out of our mold here and see what we've got. Well, that is super clear and super awesome. There is some raised edges here. That's from the capillary action of the liquid or the epoxy rising up the edges of your mold. So we're just going to take a sharp blade and we'll trim those little edges off very carefully. Well, now that the resin is poured, cured, and trimmed, we need to figure out how we want to display it. And as you know, with mine, it was in the form of like a plate rack kind of a thing, or a plate stand. But as I said at the beginning of this video, my wife had very different ideas. And it all starts out with a piece of mahogany. Well, I found this piece of mahogany up in the rack. It's just a scrap from an old project. It is approximately a foot long, 7 inches wide, and 3/4 of an inch thick. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to square off this one end here, and then I'm going to rip this into strips of 1 1/4 inches wide each. Well, before you move on to the next step, you just want to take some measurements. So this pour of the resin is not 100% level. It's not 100% even. It's pretty close, but not perfect. So what we want to do is we want to go around the entire piece and find the thickest measurement that this is. And from what I can see here, mine at its thickest is 13/16 of an inch. So what we're going to do is we are going to, in the center of each one of our pieces of mahogany, right in the middle of our 1 1/4 side, we are going to run a 13/16 of an inch wide dado all the way along, and I'd say we're probably going to make it about 1/4 of an inch deep. I've now installed a fine crosscut blade in the saw, and using our pieces of mahogany, we are now going to cut a frame by mitering the sides in order to fit our 4x6 resin pour. Now, one suggestion I'll make to you is to cut a piece of MDF or some other board to size your frame to. That way you're not scratching up your resin pour and that sort of thing. While resin is very durable and it is very hard, it also takes time to achieve that hardness. So you don't want to risk it and scratch it up now. You're better to use a piece of MDF and size your frame by that and save the scratches for later. And now, just using a frame clamp, we will test our frame here and see how well our resin fits inside the frame. Now, at this point, once you're happy with the fit, you'll sand the entire frame all over, and once you get the pieces sanded, we're going to glue it together. The difference between this frame and another frame is that normally you glue the frame together with your artwork outside of your frame. This one, with its design, will encase our artwork, so it needs to be installed and glued in now. Well, at this point, there's really nothing to do but wait for the glue to dry. So I'm going to let this set up overnight. One thing I will caution you about when gluing something like this up, you have to remember that when you're gluing up a normal frame where the artwork is added afterwards, you have the ability to get inside and clean up squeeze out. With this project, you do not. So be very careful of how much glue you apply, because you can look inside the resin and the edges of the resin pour and see squeeze out if you had any. Now, I was very careful. I did not apply too much glue. I did get a tiny bit of squeeze out on some of the corners, but nothing serious, nothing I couldn't clean up with a cotton swab and some water. So just be sure you're not overdoing it on the glue. It will cause you problems. With our frame all dried up, I just want to cut some splines into the corners. It'll give the frame a lot more strength over time, and you know, it's a really nice accent feature as well. So I've set the fence to do a 1/4 inch dado right in the middle of our frame to hold our splines in the corners. I'm using my old spline jig. I should really make a new one. You know what? This was from my old rigid table saw. It was custom made for that. Maybe that's a show idea. Maybe I should do that. What do you guys think? You can let me know below if you think that should be a good show idea. Anyway, let's get these splines cut so that we can get them glued in. Well, all I've done is taken some 1/4 inch scrap cherry with one flat edge. I've stuck it in the groove here, or the dado that we cut for our splines, and drawn roughly with a pencil. I cut them out at the scroll saw. It's as simple as can be. They're rough, yes, but as long as you have this flat edge and flat surfaces to glue into your spline kerf, the rest of it gets trimmed off afterwards anyway. So let's get these glued in, and make sure that you clean up your squeeze out really well here, guys, because if you don't, the glue can affect your final finish. And this is where cotton swabs with a little bit of water on them can be your best friend to get in there and clean up that squeeze out that oozed out of there once we push the spline into place. So clean it all up and then glue your other 3 in, and I'll see you when we get that done and they're dry. With the splines dry, we now need to trim them as flush as we can to our frame. Now, there's many ways that you could do it. You could use a block plane, you could use a flush cut saw, but my favorite way to do them by far is with the scroll saw. It's as simple as installing a blade that's appropriate. In my case here, it's a number 7 blade. Make sure that it's square to your table, and then using the back straight edge of your blade, you can actually use that as a guide against the side of your frame. trim off your spline pieces, and then all we have to do is sand the rest of it flush. It shouldn't be that difficult. It should pretty much be flush with the scroll saw. You just got to clean it up a little bit with your sander. And with that all cleaned up and the frame fully sanded, I'm just going to run a 1/8 inch round over all the way around on both sides. And there you have it. Preserving your children's crafts or their artwork in resin. Take 2. Guys, this project is similar to last week's, but only in the fact that we sealed this project up in resin. The entire concept behind it is completely different, with one being its own shape and its own entity with a wooden accent stand. This one here, completely different, with a 4x6 frame of mahogany with cherry splines. 2 totally different projects that both have the exact same end result, which is preserving that precious child's craft or their artwork basically forever. Whereas before, the resin, to protect it, its life expectancy is rather short. The only thing really left to do with this frame and this project is to apply a finish of your choice to the frame itself, and then how do you want to display it? With the frame being 1 1/4 inches thick, you could potentially have it sitting all on its own. How about placing a wire on it and hanging it in a window so that the light illuminates it from behind? How about doing what I've done and what my wife requested, which was a sawtooth hanger on the back of the frame so that she could hang it on the wall and enjoy it by her desk? The choice is up to you, what it is that you want to do with it. Either way, it's a fun project, and guys, really, it's just a load of fun and a great way to preserve those special memories for a much longer and much more extended period of time. Guys, really, this is a fantastic project. I had a lot of fun with this, and I'm glad my wife suggested to do hers a little differently than what I did mine, because it gave me a chance to play with it and change it up. I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week, guys. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell so that you don't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. If there's something that you'd like to see on the show, feel free to drop me a comment down below and I'll see what I can do for you. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're going to try it for yourself. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and more importantly, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesday.